What's going on, guys? Today I wanted to bring you another one of my 2014 WCQ hat format deck profiles. The deck I wanted to show off today is Handtrap Artifact. It's a pretty cool deck and a very interesting take on a pure artifact deck, and there's actually a couple different ways to play pure artifacts. I think I have like 2 or 3 other builds of a pure artifact deck, and this one specifically, I got some inspiration from a deck profile I found from back in 2014 that actually got top 32 at a YCS, and I thought it was pretty cool. It's very similar to Card Car Artifact Trap Tricks, or CAT as it's known, minus the Trap Tricks engine, and it plays some cool hand traps, and it also just is a very interesting, unique deck, so I'm extremely excited to get into this deck profile. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so starting off with the monsters, we are playing 3 copies of Card Car D. This is one of your best cards in terms of draw power. What it does is it can't be special summoned, and you can't special summon during the turn you activate this effect. And the turn it's normal summoned, you contribute it, draw 2 cards, and then it becomes the end phase. This is a really, really good card because, first off, you don't have a lot of normal summons in this deck. And the other thing is you're able to set all of your back row first, and obviously if you know artifacts, they're monsters that can be set in your spell and trap card zone as spell cards, and then they get effects when they're destroyed on the opponent's turn. They're able to usually special summon themselves back and then get an additional effect depending on which one it is. So this card doesn't interfere with it at all. The only time it could potentially interfere with it is if you've already summoned back multiple artifacts and you want to go into some rank 5s or something, but usually you're far enough ahead at that point where it's completely okay to, waste one turn in order to get some more card advantage, or just wait an additional turn if you start falling behind on card advantage to summon an additional one. But overall, just a very, very good card. After that, 3 copies of Artifact Madolche. Obviously, you guys should know what this card is by now, but pretty much when it's summoned on the opponent's turn, you're able to pop a face-up card that your opponent controls, non-targeting. Very, very good card. Because we are playing a lot of artifacts in this deck, we do choose to play 2 copies of Artifact Beagletech. This one, when it's special summoned on the opponent's turn, allows you to pop mandatory 1, but up to 2 of your spell and trap cards in your spell and trap card zones. So that is really good if you clog on too many artifacts, but you find a way to pop this, or if you get Sanctum into this, and then when it's special summoned, pop 2 or up to 2 of your other artifacts. It's really, really good. It helps you make a big push as well when it comes back to your turn, and it's definitely a mandatory card. After that, 1 copy of Artifact Scythe, locking the opponent out of their extra deck for the turn that it's special summoned. 1 copy of Artifact Failnaught. I had recently done a video talking about the weird, obscure artifacts and how I think they're actually decent. You should definitely check out that video if you haven't already. I'll have it linked in the description, and I kind of went over why this card is really good amongst some of the other ones that you'll see very soon. But in general, this card allows you to target a artifact in your graveyard and reset it in your spell and trap card zone. So that is extremely good. I've almost considered bumping this to 2 and bumping Beagletech down to 1, because you can kind of create a small loop with this card if you have another one in graveyard, because you can special summon this one on your opponent's turn, whether that's with Sanctum, Call the Haunted, or a handful of other things, and then reset the one that you have in graveyard. And then if you have something like an Ignition or something else, when this one gets destroyed, you can Ignition your other Failnaught that's set, and then it'll resummon itself, and you can reset the other Failnaught, and it kind of creates a slow infinite loop. As long as you have cards to keep popping it, you'll always have resources. So once we get to some of the other back row removal, it'll make a little more sense, but it's always good to have the extra artifact in your back row. After that, another one of the obscure artifacts, and this one is Artifact Aegis. This card is really, really good. I should probably mention here that it says if it's special summoned during the opponent's turn, monsters you control cannot be targeted or destroyed by opponent's card effects specifically, so they can still be destroyed by battle, and that's just for your artifacts. This one's nice because it has 2500 defense, so it is hard to get over, but also just not being able to target your other artifacts. So if you preemptively say Sanctum and summon this, it means that your morale tax and different artifacts will always resolve because they won't be able to target and try to negate them. So that is really good too. And the last artifact is 1 copy of Artifact Caduceus. This one, during the opponent's turn, while it's face up on the field, every time an artifact monster would be summoned, you'll get to draw a card. So if this is already on the field, and say you do the whole Beagle Tack play where you say ignition your Beagle Tack will then summon itself back, you'll get a draw, and then Beagle Tack pop whatever you set off of the ignition, that will trigger that card, it'll summon back, and you'll get an additional draw. It's just really good to keep gaining card advantage off of that, and having extra cards in hand is very important for a couple different reasons that we'll talk about shortly. Next, we play 3 copies of Max C. Draw power is really good, and slowing down combo decks is really nice. 3 copies of Herald of Orange Light. This is the reason I said having extra cards in hands is important. If you've never seen this card before, basically, when an opponent activates a monster effect, you can quick effect send this card and another fairy from your hand to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. So this card is just really, really solid to stop all the powerful monster effects that this, format has, as well as, since all your artifact monsters are fairies and we are playing things like Call of the Haunted and stuff, it is a cool way to get a negate, as well as if you call the Haunted back, you will get whatever artifact monster you sent its effect, so that is really good. Next, we play 1 copy of Honest. This should be a given. All your monsters, for the most part, are light, so that's really good. And the last monster is 1 copy of Archlord Christia. This one, if you have exactly 4 fairy monsters in your graveyard, which you can kind of manipulate with cards like Call of the Haunted, Soul Charge, Fail Not, etc., you're able to special summon it from your hand, and if it's special summoned by that effect, you target a fairy monster in your graveyard and add it to your hand. So it allows you to basically recycle your heralds or any of your artifacts or anything like that. And then while you control this card, or while it's face up, neither player can special summon monsters, which is extremely good, especially given it has 2800 attack, so it can be kind of hard to get over. And then if it would be sent to the graveyard, you can place it on top of your deck instead, or I should say it's mandatory, so you have to. But even if it gets placed on top of the deck, if you have a card, say like Sanctum, that will summon from deck, once this has already been put back on top, your deck will then get shuffled, so you don't have to worry about dead drawing it. But in general, very good card. I've considered playing cards like Curry Bandit in this deck, just to kind of fill your graveyard with artifacts as well as find one of your powerful spell and traps, but I found it's not really needed and you don't want to really mill your hand traps. I'd also say I want to try to make room for 2 DD Crows. Right now this deck is at 42, and there's a couple cards that I could probably consider cutting down on, and if I were to cut down on some of those, for example, cutting 1 Beagle Tack down and maybe even a Morale Tack, then I would probably start considering finding room for 2 copies of DD Crow, so maybe cut a Max C or a Herald and go from there. But that's it for the monsters. For the spells, we play 3 copies of Pot of Duality. Again, we don't really special summon too much on our turn, so just digging deeper and finding cards you need is really good. Card D plus this is always a great feeling. 3 copies of Artifact Ignition. Just, you're always going to have an artifact that you can pop off of this, or it's just back row removal for your opponent, and it lets you set a artifact, which is always good, and as well as if your opponent pops it, they skip their next battle phase. Still 2 copies of Double Cyclone. This card is really good, but with the amount of decks, for example, like a lot of the Dragon Ruler decks that don't really use too much back row, you don't really want this card to be too dead. so that's why we're only playing 2. In theory, you could also try to play something like MST, but I have another card in here that I choose to play instead. The last spell is 2 copies of Soul Charge. Just being able to basically get as many of your artifacts out of graveyard to either turn your Christie alive or, just make some rank 5s, which are extremely powerful in this format. Soul Charge is just a great card. Moving on to the traps, we play 3 copies of Artifact Sanctum, being able to special summon an artifact from your deck. And then if your opponent destroys this card, you can pop a card on the field. That's one key thing to note. So if you look here, it says if this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can target 1 card on the field and destroy that target. People forget that it has that part of the effect. They don't necessarily forget it has it, but they forget that it's anywhere on the field. So you can even pop your own artifacts that are set with that. So that is very, very important. 3 copies of Call of the Haunted, obviously to bring back your artifacts on your opponent's turn or just make pushes. Very, very good card. 2 copies of Phoenix Wing Windblast, just to restack your opponent's monsters and things. This deck already can take care of back row really well, so usually this is more so to out problematic monsters. After that, 2 copies of Malevolent Catastrophe. The reason we main this is because, again, we do play a lot of artifacts, as well as this helps us take care of opponents' back row really easily, even more so than we already had, as well as it can deal with floodgates, and there's just a ton of other things that this helps with. For example, against those dragon decks that don't play a lot of back row, this is just a way to guarantee that we can pop our own artifacts. And then the last 2 cards are 1 Breakthrough Skill, because it's just a good chainable that also has a graveyard negate effect, and 1 copy of Torrential to kind of clean up the game a little bit. That is it for the main deck. One other thing to note, I guess, with the trap lineup is the side deck for this deck. You can actually play a lot of Floodgates, specifically because we have cards like Double Cyclone and also the Malevolent Catastrophes. It means that you can play different Floodgates, such as Skill Drains, even cards like Mistake and stuff you can play in this deck, because if you see a Malevolent Catastrophe, you can just wipe it whenever you want, or if you see a Double Cyclone, you can basically turn it off whenever. So that is also just a really cool thing with this deck. Moving on to the extra, though, 1 copy of Gaia Dragon. I've considered bumping this to 2, but I think 1 is completely fine. 1 M7, just to put on top of Pleiades. 1 Zenmayo to pop back row. 1 Tiras, just because it's a good card. 2 copies of Pleiades. This card is probably the heart and soul of the extra deck. Being able to bounce your dead Call of the Haunteds is very, very good, so then you can reuse them, as well as being able to, say, Soul Charge, say, things like your Max Cs, and then bounce back your Max Cs so you can get more advantage and keep more pressure on your opponent. 2 copies of Volcasaurus. There was space for 1 more rank 5 in this deck, and I decided that having a second Volcasaurus is what has come up the most, just because there's so many times where you can't necessarily get over a monster, but if you can just destroy it and make them take some damage, it's really, really good. 1 copy of Durandal. You will really only need 1 of this because you do have Malevolent Catastrophe in the main and everything else, but it's definitely an easy inclusion in the deck. 1 copy of Shark Fortress. You can target a monster you control and it can make 2 attacks this turn, so very good card. And the last rank 5 is Crimson Shadow Armor Ninja, which makes so once per turn during either player's turn you detach a material, and then ninja monsters you control, so itself can't be destroyed by battle or card effects for the turn, so that is really, really good. Next, I play 2 rank 2s, which is 1 Daigusto Phoenix and 1 Herald of Pure Light. You can make these basically with a Max C or the Orange Herald, but there are times where these come up. Herald just to recycle a resource, and Phoenix just to push in for some damage. And then because the Herald of Orange Light is a tuner, I play 2 level 7s, so you make it with the Herald and one of your artifacts, and that's 1 copy of Michael, being able to banish cards for 1,000 life points, and also in the end phase it does mill 3, so there is a little bit of milling for this deck if need be, and then the obvious Black Rose to wipe the board. But anyways, that is this version of the deck. If you enjoyed or would like to see other versions of this deck, like I said, I have 2 or 3 other artifact variants. Some are a little more combo heavy, others are kind of like this. Definitely let me know in the comments section, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to get notified anytime I put a new video out. Share this video with your friends, let me know what videos you want to see in the future, and anyways guys, I will see you in the next video.